Turning your phone into the ultimate cinematic rig is easier than ever thanks to rig parts and camera apps that come together to let you capture anamorphic footage for epic-looking films. There are a lot of limitations when filming with a phone, but using a rig like this can easily overcome them and give you the results that you want. You can get shallow depth of field, all-day filming with external batteries, anamorphic autofocus, and a second screen allows you to easily see what you're filming, or even control it remotely. And all this for less than the cost of a budget anamorphic lens. Let's head inside to build this rig and show you exactly what's needed to make this happen, starting with your phone. The goal that led to this rig in the first place was to get a specific anamorphic look as inexpensively as possible. And on top of that, I also wanted to be able to easily film myself entirely by myself. This led to deciding on an anamorphic adapter for a phone. But I needed to add a few things to it in order to use my phone as easily as I would a regular camera. I built several variations of this rig over the last 4 years. But no amount of rig parts would solve the first problem I encountered, which was nobody makes a lens mount case for my new phone. So they have these little clips that you can use. These clips are actually designed for a slightly thinner phone. The only option was to make my own case. I don't know if it's possible, if it'll even work. I was using an old version of a camera app that was no longer updated or even supported. It wasn't perfect, but it worked decently. And then a system software update rendered me unable to use my best phone as the camera. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Of course, there are many ways to build a phone rig. Don't think of this as the only way to build one, but rather something you can pattern yours after as you build something that meets your exact needs. Besides, even between filming the intro for this video and now, I've made changes to this rig to make it as good as possible. What you need in a rig and the options you'll have available to you are really dependent on the phones that you're going to be using. In my case, I'm using 2 older Android phones, both with screens a little over 6.5 inches. That said, if you don't have the ability to do remote control or don't even have a second phone you can use, you can still build this rig just without the second screen. More about filming with the camera app, how I connect the phones, and how I fixed some of the problems I ran into along the way after we go through the parts of this rig. The core of this rig is this aluminum cage. Now I've already attached handles and an Arca clamp to it, but those are separate pieces. Then to attach the phone to the rig, I have this phone clamp. Then of course into that clamp goes the phone, which has a case on it specifically for attaching an anamorphic adapter. Once the phone is in the phone clamp, then that can attach to the quick release clamp. Then we have an MPF battery plate and a battery. And to attach this to the cage using this dual rod clamp, with its size I'm able to attach 2 screws so that there's less of a chance that the battery plate is going to rotate. And then for attaching the second phone with the monitor, I'll start with these rods, which I'll attach to the cage with this rod clamp. To attach a second rod, I'll use this right angle rod clamp, and then a rod clamp with a cold shoe mount so that I can attach a monitor mount, which will then attach another phone clamp to which goes this second phone. This whole thing allows me to have the monitor phone independently adjustable from the camera phone. I've removed this rig plate from the rig, but you will see it in some instances in this video because I made that decision halfway through. Then I have an Arca Swiss QR plate that will go onto the bottom of the cage in order to attach the whole thing to a tripod. I have this top handle to fit onto the cage, which will allow me to put a microphone on it. And of course, I have a USB-C cable that I can run from the battery plate to the phone to provide power. I also have the right angle adapter so that it fits better and a cable tie to keep it neat and orderly. Now I also have an audio adapter that goes into the phone because phones don't have 3.5mm jacks anymore. One side is for power and the other side is for audio. One thing to note about the microphone cable is one side is your normal TRS plug, but the other side is a TRRS because for a phone it expects that it's not only going to have a microphone but also speakers, just like you would for wired earbuds. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're attaching a microphone to a phone, is that you might need a different cable than you would normally use with a regular camera. And then to finish it off, I have these caps for the ends of the rods to make it neat and tidy. Any cage that has multiple attachment points and can accept the different accessories you're going to put on it will work just fine. The only thing I would say is make sure you're using aluminum and not plastic. Unfortunately, I don't believe this cage is available any longer. This small rig cage would also work. If you don't need the exact same features that I do, you could use it as is. Otherwise, just a little bit of modification to remove this would give you the exact same setup that I have. We'll talk more about that in a minute. In order to better use this cage for handheld camera moves, I added these two wood handles on the sides. One problem with the cage, though, is I don't think these holes were spaced correctly, so these were the only handles I could find that would actually work. That said, if you're using this cage or another one like it, chances are the holes will be spaced correctly and you won't have that issue. That just means you need to look at all the different parts that you're going to purchase if you're going to purchase anything to make sure that they're all going to work together. Because if you're buying things that aren't standard, you might have to make a lot of compromises in order to get it to work. Thankfully, I did find these handles that fit on this cage. Otherwise, I would have had to buy yet another cage, which I did anyway, but that's a whole other story. And on the bottom of the cage is this Arca Swiss compatible plate that allows me to use this rig on any tripod or basically any mount that I have, because everything I have is standardized on Arca Swiss. That way I can move it around as quickly as possible from this little tripod to my larger tripod with very little time to change over. To keep the phone in place, I added this little Arca Swiss compatible clamp. I love this little clamp because it works perfect for small builds because it's no bigger than it needs to be, and it has this little bubble level in it that helps you line things up. There are several ways to do the phone clamp, but as long as it holds the phone securely, it should be just fine. The two things I needed it to do were to have an Arca Swiss compatible base so that I could remove the phone as needed to use just the phone by itself, and have a cold shoe somewhere on it so that when I did have the phone removed, I would have a mounting point for a microphone. The whole point of doing it this way is so that I could easily remove the phone to either use it on a gimbal, use it in a precarious position or a small space, anything that allows me to still have the advantages of using a camera that's smaller. This is another phone clamp that I absolutely love. Aluminum, added this little QR plate to the bottom. This would also work. The one thing that I like about this one is that it locks. So once I tighten these down, that phone's in there and it's not going anywhere. Now, if you're using a phone with MagSafe, then that's certainly another option to mount your phone into a cage like this. In order to use the second phone as a monitor, I use these 15mm rods to position the phone behind the camera phone and line it up with the lens. There are several pieces that attach these rods and position the phone right where I want it, including this monitor mount, which allows me to position the phone exactly how I want. And because it's a spring clamp, I can also remove this phone quickly if I need to as well. Now, one of the things that I only just figured out about using a second phone as a monitor, because you want it to stop before this aluminum phone clamp scratches the screen of the other phone. So I figured out that if I just rotated it a little off of 90 degrees where it was originally, I would be able to push this all the way forward and avoid scratching the screen so that I didn't have to baby it and worry about where I was stopping. Instead, it would do all that work for me. Now, the other thing I have to make handheld shots easier and just give me something to haul this around by is this top handle. This is a top handle I bought many, many years ago. It's not necessarily the best one out there. There's so many options. What you are going to get depends on what sort of attachment you need for your cage. This one is a cold shoe mount, so sometimes I use this just with a camera by itself. But in this case, it has a cold shoe mount on the front, which allows me to attach my microphone. And that's why I wanted the cold shoe mount also on the phone mount, so that moving this microphone between the two if I needed to would be as quick as possible. Whatever you use for the top handle and the phone clamp, if you have the same way to mount the microphone, then when you're moving from just the phone to the rig as a whole, it makes moving the microphone take that much less time. While you could build this rig for normal spherical footage, my whole point in building it was to build an inexpensive anamorphic setup. This adapter allows me to do just that. There are various types out there with different squeeze factors and qualities. One thing you should do, if at all possible, is to get one that's compatible with a case for your phone. This will make mounting it so much easier, and you'll avoid all the headache I had trying to make a custom case specifically for my phone. One thing to be aware of is some anamorphic adapters may cause vignetting if you have a newer phone with a larger sensor. So make sure you're getting an adapter that's designed for the phone that you have in mind. If nothing else, save your receipts so you can return it if needed. Of the two adapters I own, I went with this 1.55 squeeze factor for two reasons. One, it gives a wider image, which is part of the look that I was going for. And two, this one is black and the other one is silver. Now, that really shouldn't matter, except that the inside of the other one is also silver, leading to extra reflections and flaring depending on where the light is hitting it. So just keep that in mind. If you're going for a cheap adapter like I did, make sure that the inside at least is entirely black to minimize any unwanted reflections and stuff that's just gonna wash out your image. Now, on the other hand, that might be a look that you want with carefully controlled lighting or whatever. That might actually be really nice. But for what I was doing, it was just too distracting and didn't look good. Now, if I was gonna do this over without trying to be as cheap as possible, I would probably just buy an iPhone and then get some Moment T-Series anamorphic adapters. The way they connect to your phone is way better, less of a chance that you're going to accidentally misalign them. They're better quality glass, and honestly, as much as I love Android, with the iPhone, you're gonna have better support for filmmaking apps and tools and cases because generally filmmakers use iPhones. But if I was entertaining spending that money on a new phone, I might actually just buy a couple anamorphic lenses for my regular camera instead. Achieving a shallow depth of field with a small sensor can be hard to do. The simplest way is to make sure you're filming things as close as possible, but you probably don't want everything with shallow depth of field to be an extreme close-up either. The other way you can do this is with diopters. Now, of course, generally speaking, diopters are also used for close-ups, but what they actually do is change the maximum distance away that you can focus. By bringing your maximum focus distance closer, everything beyond it is going to be blurrier. So the stronger a diopter you use, the greater the effect will be. So I've got a +10 diopter, and the focus is about 5 to 6 inches from the lens. So if I walk in the background, see how out of focus I am. Now, it does have the effect of needing to bring your subject closer to the camera. However, because you're using an anamorphic adapter, you're still going to be able to get a decently wide image, allowing you to get some shallow depth of field shots that normally wouldn't be possible with a cell phone. Of course, the diopters are also good for close-up shots. Now, if you want to achieve a 180-degree shutter, ND filters are a must. Because of how much wider the anamorphic adapter makes the image, it's best to use a step-up ring and a larger filter. Initially, I had these smaller filters, but as soon as I stacked a few or used them with diopters, I got some severe vignetting, which is fine if you're gonna crop the image later, but that means that you're basically planning to throw away parts of the image, and the whole point of doing this is to have as nice wide an image as possible. But when I was going through everything for this part of the video, even after I had filmed my intro, I found a larger variable ND that I had sitting around that I had forgotten I had, and these larger ND filters and diopters and a step-up ring that I had purchased specifically to do this sort of thing. This variable ND allows me to have even stronger ND, so I shouldn't have to stack multiple filters to reduce my stops as much. These are actually sized for my small cinema lenses that I use. I haven't fully tested them yet, but I'm hoping that this will be exactly what I need to get the look that I want and make vignetting a thing of the past. Finally, you'll need an external microphone to get good audio. If I don't really care about the audio or I'm not doing dialogue, I use this little Rode mic. If I want to get good dialogue and not worry about the distance to camera, then I use my Rode Wireless Go. And because phones these days have done away with the 3.5mm jack, you're going to need a USB adapter in order to plug the microphone into your camera. Now, there's various kinds out, and you might need different options from them. This one has both the 3.5mm jack and USB-C. without having to swap back and forth. Depending on what you're doing with the rig, this might be important, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later when I talk about some of the problems I've also had. In order for all-day filming to be a possibility, you're going to need an external battery and a battery plate to connect it to your phone with. The battery plate is going to need USB-C. Most likely you have a phone that has USB-C. If you don't, you might need some sort of adapter. There are some batteries that have USB-C connection directly built into them, but by using this plate with the USB-C built in, it allows me to switch batteries as quickly as possible without having to unplug cables. Ideally, you would have a battery plate with 2 USB outputs so you can power both phones. And if you don't mind your rig getting even bigger and you wanted more power, you could get a V-mount battery plate that has USB-C output as well. You can get D-tap to USB-C cables. The problem is they're a little bulky because of what's needed to change the voltage from D-tap to whatever the USB-C expects. If you're just making a short project, you may not need to worry about running out of space on your phone. But if you're already low on space, or it's a bigger project, or you're using a codec with large file sizes, you'll need some way to manage your footage on the go. Since most phones don't have micro SD card slots anymore either, you have a few options to make sure you can manage all your footage while you're out filming. You could, of course, keep it small by making sure you only do small projects, freeing up space on your phone so you have as much space as possible. If your phone supports it, you could record to a portable SSD or even use a USB card reader with a card inside of it to record to just the same as you would an SSD. Basically, any external storage that connects to your phone will allow you to have more space to keep all your footage. Finally, the last option is, as you fill up your phone, copy the footage over to a laptop or another device. The problem is this is going to take time. You're going to have to stop filming to do this, and you run the risk of accidentally deleting files because you have to delete what's on the phone in order to continue filming. If you do this, double, triple check that that footage is backed up on a laptop or wherever you put it before you delete it from your phone so you don't lose all your hard work. The ability to use a second phone as a monitor is what really makes this rig useful. But whether or not this is an option depends on the phones that you have. In order to get the same features as I've built, your phones will need the ability to connect to each other, whether it's through Wi-Fi or hotspot sharing or being on the same Wi-Fi network. This will either require filming in a place where there is Wi-Fi, or it could require an unlocked phone or an additional charge from your carrier depending on what your phone options are. You'll then need a camera app that can do remote control between devices. I'm using the legacy version of Filmic Pro because I paid for it before they switched to a subscription model, but that newer version would also work if you don't mind paying for a subscription. Or if you have devices that support it, the Blackmagic camera app also has this functionality, but since my phones are too old and not compatible, I can't tell you exactly what that looks like. So before we talk about using this rig, let's talk about a few settings that you'll need to change in order to get the best image possible. Regardless of the camera app you use, if you have the ability, you should turn the sharpness and noise reduction all the way down and turn the bitrate as high as it will go. While it can be helpful at times, you're really going to want to turn off image stabilization if at all possible, especially any electronic stabilization. Because if you're using stabilization, there can be two problems that you run into. First, if you have stabilization on and there are any flares in the shot, which is going to be much more likely using an anamorphic adapter, then whether it's a handheld shot or more elaborate motion, the image might be stable, but the flares will then jitter around and it will just look weird. The motion of the flares will compete with the motion of the camera, and it's just not going to look right. Second, depending on the sensor on your phone and the lens that you have, there could be vignetting. This was one of the things that I ran into with my newer phone because it has a slightly larger sensor than the anamorphic adapter was designed for. And of course, the most important setting to change is making sure your phone is silent before you start recording your film. Because this older phone that I use is not used as a phone at all, I've set it up specifically and exclusively as a camera. Phones are generally designed to be used vertically, but cameras are designed generally to be used horizontally. So to make life easier for me with this rig, because I have Android, I installed a home screen launcher on the phone that supports a horizontal layout. Whether or not this is an option for you depends on your operating system and settings and a whole host of things, but that is something to consider if you're using the phone in a predominantly horizontal layout. Thankfully, my newer phone actually supports vertical and horizontal layouts by default, so I don't have to worry about things rotating on me and turning my head sideways just to see what's going on the screen. I've spent some time testing this rig and the various incarnations of it, both with just B-roll shots and making a short test film. Even with the challenges that came up, in all cases, I was able to make something that I was happy with. Especially if you haven't done anything like this, it's really important to do some test shots to make sure everything's going to work as intended. For this, because I was going for a very specific look, it was important to me to know whether or not this rig and combination of everything would allow me to achieve that look. So make sure that you're doing some test filming just to make sure it's going to work as you intend, especially with lighting conditions and weather conditions that you expect to encounter during whatever project it is that you're making this for. Now, along the way, I ran into a few issues here and there, usually having to do with the phone's software or hardware and not so much with the rig itself. All the things that I encountered, though, I felt were things I could figure out to get this rig doing exactly what I needed it to do. Until a system software update meant I could no longer use my newer phone with Filmic Pro. There were other apps I could use, of course, but then I wouldn't be able to have a second phone as a monitor, unfortunately. I have another great manual camera app, but unfortunately it doesn't support using a second device as a monitor, and that's the one thing that really makes this rig useful. So I decided to swap phones. The older phone doesn't receive updates anymore, and Filmic Pro still can use the cameras on it. And as it turns out, that older phone has a really nice filmic looking image. The biggest challenge I ran into isn't something that I can fix short of buying new phones. Because of having to switch which phone was doing the filming and which phone was doing the monitoring, the phone doing the recording has a hardware limitation that doesn't allow it to record external audio and charge at the same time. I thought it was the adapter, but the adapter specifically said that it does allow for both of those, which led me to finally figure out that it was actually the phone hardware that prohibited me from being able to do that. I've done my research. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. This means I need to keep a constant eye on the battery and make sure I'm swapping back and forth so that the correct thing is plugged in when I'm actually filming. Now, this isn't ideal, but it might not even be an issue for you depending on what phones you have. In other words, to get this working the way you want it to, depending on your phone, you might have to do a bit of research to see if what you want to do is going to even be possible before you invest in getting a few pieces to build this type of rig. So just know that if you have a newer phone, they're probably a lot more capable with attached peripherals, so you might be able to do a lot more than what I've shown you with this rig. So one other challenge is that wet weather makes it hard or impossible to use the touchscreen. The raindrops on the screen make it less responsive, but the challenge with using a phone is you don't have any physical buttons you can use instead, and so you have to use the touchscreen to operate the camera. There's a couple of options. The first is just not to film in wet weather, but the other option would be to use a monitor hood just like you would for a monitor on a regular camera rig, in order to keep the rain off of the touchscreen that you need to operate. Even though this rig makes the phone heavier and does reduce micro jitters, it's still possible to get a little unwanted movement because it's still fairly lightweight, at least as far as camera rigs go. This is of course easy to overcome by adding more weight, reducing movement, using things like a gimbal with just the phone. A small lightweight camera is hard to move smoothly, so even though you've built a rig for this, that's still something to keep in mind and plan your shooting and camera motion accordingly. The advantages definitely outweigh the disadvantages when it comes to using this rig to get smooth, cinematic, anamorphic video. I learned a lot using this on a test film all by myself. To see how it went in a behind the scenes, watch this video.